Okay,
Well, I'd like to welcome
I'm gonna
everybody
mute you.
to our scheduling workshop, and we're going to take a look at the labor inventory concept first, because when you learn to sell the labor, you really learn to sell everything else that goes along with that. So we're going to take a look at labor inventory and what that means. And my experience is that if you don't sell the labor, then you have lots and lots of issues. The example that I like to use is that, let's say in the morning you've ordered 8 spark plugs and they're dropped off at your shop by your part vendor at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you see them on the excuse me, on the counter, and you count them. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that day, you know 4 of those were installed on a customer's vehicle. But at the end of the day, the other 4 that you saw there in the morning are gone. They're just gone. You have no idea where they went. The next day, 8 tires are dropped off at your shop at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you count them. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that day, you know 4 of them were installed on a customer's vehicle. But at the end of the day, the other 4 that you saw there in the morning are gone. And the question is, how long would it take the average owner to freak out to find out whether his plugs or tires are going, day 1 or day 2? Of course, the answer is day 1. I mean, we would not tolerate a shrinkage of 50% in our parts inventory. And yet, 30 years of doing this type of training, I can assure you that lots of shops, way too many shops, sell much less than the inventory they have available to them. At 8 o'clock in the morning, usually your technicians show up, and usually they're there 8 hours in the day, excluding lunch. And the question is, at the end of the day, how many hours did you sell, and how many hours went missing, like the example I just gave of the spark plugs. The average independent repair shop, and I don't exaggerate things, only sells 4 to 5 of the hours that are available. So the question is, what's happening with the other 3 or 4 or whatever? And we're not talking about flat rate or performance-based pay or hourly or salary. It doesn't matter. In this case, we're looking at inventory. So how you pay for that inventory is not really a question here. The question is, what happened to the inventory? So Dave, I'm going to ask you some questions if you don't mind, and I'm going to fill this in based on your shop. And because we are doing a webinar from Canada, we're not too concerned up here with antitrust that you have in the US, and because we have people that take training from all across the country. By the way, I've been to all 50 states, which has been a really neat thing for a Canadian, excuse me, to be able to do. So you have 2 technicians, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and how many hours are your technicians available in an average month? You're not open Saturday, I'm assuming.
Right. Yeah, 40 hours a week.
Okay, and so 4.2 weeks in the average month. And just to let you know, everybody, I'm going to be sending this Excel spreadsheet to you. I don't send it before the session because we fill in the spreadsheet as we go through, and it makes sense, excuse me, to explain it in the class. So we're looking at labor inventory, and whether you're an average shop, an above average shop, or an awesome shop, your technicians are going to be there approximately 336 hours. And if I understand it correctly, Dave, you don't spend much time in the bays at all, correct?
That's true.
But for those of you that are listening and you do yourself as the owner spend time in the bay, you need to factor that in. Because if you're seeing the revenue generated when you worked on cars, but you're not seeing any cost associated with it, then that's really fictitious, because it's making it look like you didn't get paid, but of course you did, maybe for the management role. But you need to factor in yourself when it comes to labor inventory. So whether you're an average shop, an above average shop, or an awesome shop, the idea is, how many hours are we there? How many hours are we selling? And how many hours didn't get sold? And for the purpose of this exercise, your labor rate, sir?
168.58.
So whenever somebody says that to me, I know they've taken training, because, so 168?
Correct.
Oh, sir. I mean, I know you said that to me before the session started here, but
Welcome to the Bay Area.
yes, sir. Actually, we have a fellow who's in our management group. He is in the California area, well down, close to LA. He was actually in Burbank, and he works on Rolls Royces. And he had to move away from Burbank just because the cost of the real estate there was just completely stupid, right? So just for the record, that's the highest labor rate I've ever seen, ever. And so I'm not used to that. I've been back up in Canada, and I assure you that in most cities in Canada, most shops are below $100. There's only 2 cities in all of Canada where everybody's been over 100, and that's Calgary, where I live, and Saskatoon, which is not that far from here. So what we're looking at here is the potential. So if you're an average shop and your technicians are there, 2 of them, 40 hours a week, 4.2 weeks in an average month, 168 hours each. So you fill it in with the inventory, in this case, with your shop, 336. Productivity is defined by how much time the technician spends working on income producing work. So any wasted time is not part of that. Comebacks are not part of that. Waiting for work is not part of that. All the things that happen in a day that prevent a technician from working on stuff that makes money. The beginning of the day, if we have to get a bunch of vehicles outside and out of the bays and off the lifts and such, excuse me, and at the end of the day, we call it the rack 'em and stack 'em, where you spend some time at the end of the day putting vehicles back in, and you can get pretty creative and put, 6 cars in a 3-bay shop. You put them up on the lift and the cars underneath, and so there's a lot of time in the day that gets wasted. And unfortunately, in the average shop in North America, only 60% of the day is actually spent on money-making work, jobs. Now, that's not the case in dealerships, of course, but in a lot of independent repair shops, the average productivity is 60%. So that's 60% of the day spent working on income-producing work. Efficiency is how fast the technician is, the ability to beat the time or make time. The average technician is 100% efficient. That's where the time estimating guides come from. They'll take 3 techs, do a job, which, by the way, includes punching in and out of a time clock and getting everything ready and the tools all set up and the test drives and all of that stuff. And they take the average of that and becomes the book time. So the average technician should be able to complete the job within the time that's allotted. Now, of course, we want to see above 100, but the average technician is 100% efficient. Now, if it's less than that, or it should be higher than that because they do have the ability, it may not be the technician's fault. It may be the fault of the vehicle, in that the vehicle is not a routine task. It's a non-routine task because of huge amounts of mileage or rust or dust or broken bolts or an abused vehicle or whatever it might be. So if a vehicle has extra issues with it because it's been in an accident or the owner worked on it himself and made a bunch of messes that we have to clean up, those are non-routine tasks, and that's not a service advisor issue, or sorry, a technician issue. That's a service advisor issue who's not selling the work because it's a non-routine task. But the bottom line is, if we sell the work correctly, the average technician should be able to maintain 100% efficiency. That produces 201 hours. Now, that's horrible. We were there for 336, and we only sold 201, and there's none left. Back to the analogy of the spark plugs in the tires. In a month or week or year or whatever, we bought 336 spark plugs, we sold 201.6, and there's absolutely none left. At a labor rate, a great labor rate of 168.58, that would mean your labor potential could be just under $34,000. And all the parts and the extras to go along with that. And just quickly, I separate out parts and then the parts and the extras below. Years ago, it used to be very common that we'd say that your parts revenue and your labor revenue should be pretty close to each other, 50-50. That's no longer the case because we do a lot more diagnostics. Without parts, we spend a lot more time of our day just finding out what the problem is, doing inspections and diagnostics. And so we're seeing more labor sales. And so labor sales, if they were $34,000 were rounded up, the parts to go along with that should be about $32,000. And then when we add the extras, and by that we mean sublet tires, towing shop supplies, and environmental fees, because tires should be separated out of parts. So at that shop with 2 techs in a month, you should be able to do about $68,000. If this shop is an above average shop, we are still there 336 hours. We are still at a labor rate of $168.58, but our labor potential is higher because we were 75% productive. We spent 75% of the day working on stuff that makes money, and the efficiency of the technician was faster because the technician's better trained, better skills, more motivation, more tools, more equipment, more organization, more maintenance. There's a lot of reasons why a shop will be more efficient than another. and it could be the service advisor selling a lot more gravy work and flushes and such. So this shop with the same number of hours was able to produce 282.24. Now it's still not 280. 282 is not great considering we had 336 available, but it's certainly better than the shop down the street that's just average at 201. At the exact same labor rate, not a higher labor rate, the labor potential now goes up to 47,580. So that's a whole lot better than the 33,000, but we still didn't sell all of the time. The question is, if a technician is more productive, spends more time working on income-producing work, in this above-average shop, we only wasted 25% of the day, which is still a lot, but that's waiting for work, waiting for cars, waiting for authorization from the customer, waiting because the customer's late, the technician standing there wanting to get their next repair order, work order, whichever country you're in, and they can't because the advisor is busy right now, or it's a comeback, or whatever it might be, clean up of the bays. So time does get wasted. We would sell a lot more labor, and the question is, if we're more productive and spend more time working on income-producing work, and we're more efficient, we're faster at it, we are definitely going to sell more parts. It's the way it works. And what I've learned very clearly is the better you are at selling labor, the better your shop is at selling everything else that you sell. But if the labor is not being sold correctly, if we're only selling 4 or 5 hours a day, we're only selling 4 or 5 hours a day of the parts and the sublet and the tires possibly and shop supplies and all of the extras. So now the parts purchase potential with all the parts and the extras, 47,000. So the potential here at an above average shop is 95, almost 96,000. In the awesome shop, same thing, available 336 hours. We're not working longer. We're not open Saturday and Sunday and longer nights. We still have 2 techs working 8 hours a day for a month, but they're 90% productive. They're spending 90% of the day working on stuff that makes money. The highest that this number can possibly be is 100%. I've heard people say, well, my technicians are 110% productive. Well, what they may be referring to is efficiency, because that can and should exceed 100%. Or they might be talking about proficiency, which we're going to see in the workbook. It has the definitions of these 3 things in there. But it can't not be true productivity. Productivity, it's defined by how much time the technician spends working on income-producing work at your shop. So, Dave, if you've got me at your shop and I'm your tech, and I've been there for 8 hours, and you say, hey, Kelly, how much time did you actually spend working on cars today? 9? That's impossible. You ever have people say, I give you 110%. That sounds all motivated and stuff, but it's impossible. If I'm at your shop for 8 hours, the longest I could possibly have spent working on things that make money is 8 hours. It cannot exceed that. Efficiency certainly can, and it should, and a really good technician with lots of good training and lots of tools and lots of motivation and drive, and a shop that's organized in the tools, and we're selling more maintenance and we're pre-booking more appointments. There's lots of reasons why a shop will be more productive than another and more efficient than another. We're not looking for 100% productivity. I'd like to make that clear. 100% productivity is totally impossible. You would have to have non-smoking technicians. You would have to install catheters so they didn't have to go to the bathroom. They would not be able to do any texting whatsoever. They would not be able to have coffee breaks. We're not asking a person to spend every minute of the day that they're there working. That's not possible. 90% is a really good number. Ultimately, in our management groups, we're actually looking at 95%, which you see beside this analogy or this exercise is your shop that you would fill in there. So now we produce 378 hours, and here's the magic of it. We sold more hours than we had. You can't buy 280 you can't buy 336 spark plugs and sell 378 of them. You can't buy 336 tires and sell 378 if you only had 336. But because labor is not a tangible, it's not a fixed object that you put someplace. Labor is actually something that is considered to be invisible. You can't actually see it. How do you show somebody diagnostics unless you videotape the technician doing it? But because it's an intangible, you can actually sell more than you had. And depending how you pay your technicians, if they're paid hourly, the brilliance of this is the money is so much there because you're paying for 336 hours, but you're actually getting 378. But the reality for a lot of shops is they're paying for 336 if they're hourly or salary, and they're only getting paid for 201. So that's where it gets really scary. I have a client who's done well for many, many years. He's very productive, very efficient. Every piece of equipment known to man, he's air conditioned his bays because he wants good productivity. He's a really smart operator, and he pays hourly, and he pays for 8 hours a day, and he sells on an average of 11. So that's 3 hours a day that he collects money for at his labor rate that he doesn't have to pay for because the techs are getting paid for 8. Now he bonuses them well and takes really good care of his employees, but that's 3 hours a day. I just had a customer, by the way, a client, who went back, made a bunch of changes in the last couple months, and their labor sales in the last 2 months are up $21,000. Payroll only went up a couple of thousand because there's one guy that's flat rate, so it cost them a little bit more. But to see sales go up for 21,000 and gross profit go up about 19,000, that goes right to the bottom line because you're not paying for the extra hours, you were paying for them all along anyway. So at the same labor rate, 168, your labor potential 63,000, the parts and just the parts alone 60,000, the parts again, sublet tires, towing, shop supplies, environmental fees. Look at the difference between an awesome shop, 127,000, and an average shop at $68,000, and the labor rate is exactly the same, and the number of hours is exactly the same. So to see a difference, in this case of $32,000, actually I'm looking at the wrong line, a difference of $59,000 every single month. Now you can, if you so desire, change this and simply do it for an entire year. So you can't really say it's going to be 40 hours a week for 52 weeks in a year because there's some time off for vacations and holidays and those kinds of things. So all you need to do is calculate what the labor inventory is for the entire year. So I'll just do some very quick math there. And I'm just going to say that out of fairness, they're going to work 50 weeks in a year. So let's take the 50 and multiply that by the 168, and we'll multiply that by 2. So that's 16,800 hours. And you think about that, the reality of that. I would rather manage 16,800 spark plugs or 16,800 tires than 6,800 hours, because it's an intangible, and then you've got some attitude to go along with that. And this is the first time that the average column was too small to put that number in. So you can fill it in for an entire year and see what the potential is at the shop, somewhere between 3.4 million and 6.3 million. I think I did the math right. I'm just going to do it one more time because it's the highest number I've ever seen, but that labor rate is people watching this are thinking, oh my God, I love that labor rate, but how much do you pay your techs? How much do you pay for rent? It's just absolutely incredible. I know what I did wrong, sir. It's 168 times 11.5 times 2. Sorry, that looked good, didn't it? 3864. I know what I did wrong. I did it for 12 months times 2 times 168, which is not the case. So we've got 3864. I was probably freaking you out with those numbers, eh? Okay, so we're looking at this. So somewhere between $780,000 in an average shop and 1.54 million. So over here with your own shop, you can fill this in. I'm going to recommend that if you're really hopping, and we track it in our management groups, 95% productivity is certainly doable. I've tracked the average awesome technician, whether the flat rate or hourly doesn't really matter in this case. It's got to do with motivation and leadership and team building and the kind of work you sell and the environment. And then you fill in your labor rate there, and you're going to see what your potential is. So I wanted to, first of all, take a look at labor inventory. And now what I want to take a look at is the whole area of the theory of scheduling. Now, not everybody that's going to be on this webinar or any is going to all have the same shop management system. What's really important here is that we take a look at the theory. Were you seeing that? Was I sharing the screen at that point? Yes, I was, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
see it. I see it. Yeah.
I know. What I like to do, and it's just, you know what, back in the days of even the transparencies, I'm dating myself, but back when Bob O'Connor was teaching me, we used transparencies. And I know Bob, he would always take the transparency off without turning off and I just didn't like that. I didn't like the visual of watching that thing move. So I got into the habit of turning off the projector and then putting on the next slide, and I just thought it looked better. And I find that I do the same thing now with PowerPoint, so you don't see the transitions in between. So it doesn't matter in this case whether you use a shop management system. Some people use paper scheduling. It's kind of dated, but it's kind of dated. Okay, and that was the other meeting that we had earlier. And what I want to look at here is the theory. And again, this comes back to some training from Bob O'Connor way back in the day. And the idea is that you sell hours. Your inventory is hours. Your inventory is not vehicles. Some people count how many vehicles are coming in. That's kind of silly, because how long does it take to fix 10 cars? Well, is it 10 oil changes, 10 valve jobs, something in between? So we don't count cars, we count hours. So I want to make a few things very clear here. Scheduling theory. This is the theory, the concept of labor. And again, whether you track it like this, you could track it manually. Some people have a spreadsheet, just like I'm going to show you here. I've seen some people who took the old scheduling system and put it into an electronic system. And then shop management systems, of course, some are better than others. The idea is the scheduling is important, but what's really important is tracking the labor inventory and building in some reserve time. Back in the day, you probably remember Dave, because you took some training from Bob years ago, and he had this great appointment schedule. And by the way, I still see some people using it, even though it's 20 years old. It still works. But it's paper. It's not electronic. But I would ask people, how many people are using Bob's schedule? And people had been to the class a month before. I come back and say, okay, before we get into the new material, what have you done? Because I've learned that training doesn't increase the success of your business. Implementation of the training does. So I would ask people, okay, who was here a month ago? Yep. Are you using this schedule? Yeah, I love it. Okay. Are you using the estimated and available time or columns? And I would safely say 80% of the hands went down, because they didn't use that part. And if all you do is have a nice fancy schedule, you've got the customer's name and the vehicle and all that information. But if you don't use the inventory tracking portion of it, there's really not much point other than it kind of looks all nice in one spot. Let's take the example of a three technician shop, and they're available 8 hours in a day. So our inventory is 24 hours. And again, I'd like to make this point very clear. Your inventory is hours. It's not vehicles. How many hours do we have available? How many hours are we selling to our customer? And how many hours are left? Or did we run out of hours? Because one of two things is usually going to happen. At the end of the day, we're going to run out of cars before the end of the day, or we're going to run out at the end of the day before we run out of cars. And I assure you, there's a lot more shops out there that at the end of the day, they have more work still to do. They could stay another shift and still have enough work to do. Most shops, I find, do not have a car count problem. Most shops have a problem making every car count. So if this was a live session, I would ask people, you've got 3 techs, 8 hours apiece, 24 hours of inventory. How many of those would you want to have sold before the day even starts? Now, we're only looking at one day here. We're looking at today. But you should be able to see this exact same information for a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. I'm curious, Dave, your mic's available here. Did you perchance see or hear the interview that I did with Jim Voigt?
No.
Okay, so just so you know, part of the material that comes out with this, I had sent it out by email, so some people had already listened to it. I interviewed him earlier this week. Jim Voigt is a fellow with a repair shop in Waterloo, Ontario, 3rd generation business, and he had 3 technicians at the time. And he was in one of our classes, and he made a comment about how much he hated February. He couldn't stand February, hated February, and I asked him why. I knew the answer, but he said, oh, it's a horrible month. He said, I feel sick going into work thinking, is anybody going to show up? I felt like the Maytag repairman. We'd be sitting there with the technicians and thinking, okay, is somebody coming in at 8:30? Hopefully somebody's going to drive by and have a problem. I forget, what do you call those things that you put on the street that the police use to give flat tires? He wanted to put some of those strips or whatever they're called on the road to get people's tires to need to be replaced, because he was just so frustrated. So I actually quoted to him Bob O'Connor. I said, well, I'm not as bold as Bob O'Connor, my mentor, was, but if you told Bob O'Connor that you hate February and your dad hated February and his dad hated February, Bob O'Connor would look at you and say, so, Jim, you've known this for 3 generations and you haven't done anything about it. And that is definitely the way Bob O'Connor spoke. He was very clear about things. You never wondered, I wonder what he meant. So I quoted him, and I really said it to him, but I quoted somebody else, so it didn't make me look bad, especially here in Canada, because we want to be nice to people. One thing I learned about working in the U.S., and I've been to all 50 states, which has been a great experience for me, like I said, and I excuse me, and I just completely lost my train of thought there. What was I talking about? Help me out here. I'm not using notes. Something about Bob O'Connor, Jim. Oh, I know what it is.
Bob O'Connor.
Yeah, one thing I learned, I'm back. One thing I learned about Americans in my experience is if Americans don't like you, they tell you. And if Canadians don't like you, they tell everybody else. And I personally would rather hear it from the person directly. And that's one thing I learned to love about Americans very quickly is you say it the way it is, which is non-passive aggressive, which is the correct way of dealing with people. They say Canadians are so polite, we even say thank you to ATM machines, right? So back to this. So we've got 24 hours in a day. So the question is, how many would we want before the day even starts? When you hear the interview from Jim Voigt, he decided he was not going to hate February anymore because he was going to take our advice back in 2005 and start pre-booking appointments. And I recall very well that I was speaking in Las Vegas at the Cars Convention on November 2nd, I guess it was, of 2005. I remember it well because 2006, I guess. Because prior to that I had this massive car accident, which a lot of people heard about. I was supposed to speak at the Cars Convention, and the night before I was hit by a taxi walking across the street and didn't teach that class. I spent 2.5 weeks in hospital there, airlift at home, 3.5 weeks hospital, and 5 months in a wheelchair. So somebody else taught my class for me. But I did get a chance to go back 2 years later and teach the session that I felt like I was 2 years behind on. But I recall reading an email from Jim specifically because I wanted to talk about pre-booking appointments. I said, here's a guy who always hated February, couldn't stand February, and I'm going to read an email that he just sent to me. And it said, I already have 44 pre-booked appointments for February, and that was in November. In your notes, there's an email that you're going to see from Ron Tremblay, who is also a king of pre-booking appointments. At any given time, he will have over 800 pre-booked appointments, and he's taken it down to how much money that actually is. And again, I like this because we're not talking about somebody started doing something yesterday and it's working. It takes a little while before people take you seriously. That's like saying, I quit smoking. I'm really enjoying not smoking. I haven't smoked now since this morning. Too little too early to say you're a non-smoker. But when somebody for that many years is still pre-booking appointments, knows how many people show up, people expect it, and it runs the business totally differently. And when you listen to the interview, it's about 22 minutes long with Jim, and he's talking about how he implemented, and I asked him all the questions that I don't want to steal his thunder, but he was definitely the king of pre-booking appointments, and he had 44 then. And what I really liked about his story is I got to know him and his family very well, and I would stay in their home whenever I'd go to Waterloo and do training, which was quite frequent. And I got to see all these transitions. And now he has 9 technicians and has done extremely well. And I think the thing that he's done more than anything that revolutionized his business was pre-booking appointments. And I recall him saying to me one time, because as a trainer, when I traveled, I wanted to be home with my kids. I didn't want to be one of those dads that was hardly home. And so I took it very seriously right from the beginning. And I didn't work a lot. I mean, I traveled about 120 days a year, which is a lot, but that means I was home for the rest. And home, I was off all summer. I was off every spring break. I would block off my calendar. On my son's 21st birthday, he said, Dad, you've been to 21 birthdays. You've never missed one. I loved that. But I'd get my schedule from the kids in September, and I'd see when spring break was going to be, and I would block that off. And Jim said he wanted to do the same thing. So that same year, he decided to take his family as March whatever to Newfoundland, Canada. And he started pre-booking appointments. And the week before he went, he called me and said, guess what? He said, we have 70% of our day already booked for the entire time that I'm gone. He said, the worst thing that could possibly happen is that too many people show up and want more work done. He said, but I'm not wondering, is there people going to be there today? Is it going to fill up? Is the day going to get better? And again, his concern was that. And when you listen to the interview, he's actually now been back to Newfoundland 5 times. I don't know if they've all been during spring break, but it's a pretty neat place. So what a lot of people would say is if I got 24 hours of inventory available, what I'd like to be able to do is to sell that 24 hours in advance. No reserve time whatsoever. I've got 24 hours. Let's sell it. And so the question is, if you don't start with some reserve time built in, and again, you're going to hear Jim's comment. He is 70% booked for at least the next 4, maybe 5 months. I'm not sure about the 5th month, but he's definitely booked out that far. And 70% of his day is booked. So even if he looks at a date in February or March, and it's a 5-hour job, he'll look at a schedule and think, okay, we can't do it that day because we don't have enough inventory. And he's looking that many months out. So let's say that we're going to do this timing belt job, and I just threw some times in earlier with the technician. I'm just going to redo this math and make sure that, because we made some changes to it earlier. And so we've got, and that's going to be not a positive number. So if we had 24 hours available and we'd sold, 3 hours for this timing belt, and we're going to do an LOF, which is like 0.2, and a state inspection, and maybe the LOF had an inspection along with that and some work. The bottom line is we are already oversold and the day hasn't even started. Now, Dave, again, your mic's open. I will ask you, you've been doing this a long time. What percentage of your customers would you say, when they come in for their appointment, say something like, by the way, while it's here, could you also? I know I'm only here for an oil change, but the car's been pulling to the right or pulling to the left, or it's making a noise, or I'm here for something and I notice I need an oil change. How many people that come into your shop on an average day want more work done than they had an appointment for?
At least 50%.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. Some people say 100. I think that's a stretch.
That's not true, but yeah.
But and I'm going to tell you that the number one answer I've had is 50. Most people say 50. And so now it becomes a problem because this LOF isn't just an LOF. Now they're in there and they've got their grocery list. And you'll hear it in the interview with Jim. I don't know why that math didn't change. With Jim, he used to get annoyed with these people. He would tell me, these people completely piss me off. What's wrong with these people that come in and they want more work done and they don't tell you? And some people lie. They say, can I get an oil change today? Yeah, come on in. And they get there and say, oh, by the way, while it's here, they don't want to tell you the whole thing on the phone because you might say no. But if it sounds simple, you might say yes. So now as the day changes and now we do this diagnosis of the fluid leak, and now it's not just 1 hour of diagnostics time. And by the way, the reason I made this part red is because when it's coming to diagnostics, we don't know what the problem is. We don't know how long it's going to take to repair it. It's like asking how long is a string. We don't know that yet. So to be very clear, in your estimated actual time, you're going to put just the diagnostics time. So we're going to sell this customer an hour of diagnostics. We don't tell them it's an hour, but we're going to sell them an hour in our inventory and whatever work needs to be done. So if we've got some reserve time, then we say, okay, that's going to be a 3-hour job, and now we're oversold only -2 hours. But then there's the drive-ins, and sort of the walk-ins, the people who just walk in. So it's very stressful to have sold all of your time before the day starts. So our recommendation is that you start your day with 19 hours. And I think I've done so much math in this that, oh, it's working. So now we're at -8. So the day hasn't even started, and we're at -8, and now people are going to come in and want more work done. So our recommendation is we build in 20% reserve time. I've been doing this a long time. I can assure you that 20% for most shops is not enough on a Monday, usually not enough on a Friday. And you're going to hear Jim say it's 30% that he builds in. I see a lot of people who have 30% reserve time on Mondays. I have some shops that put 50% reserve time on Fridays, or on Mondays, I should say, because they don't want to be able to have to turn people away, or when people come in and say, can you do it today? I can't do it. Yeah, we did your brake inspection, but we can't do the brakes today. And of course, you got the vehicle up on the lift and the wheels are off, and you don't want to have to put that back together. So our recommendation is that you don't oversell the day. So we've got a fairly busy day here. It's probably a very activity-based shop. So the idea is that you build in reserve time, and the idea is when you get to zero, now let's bring this back just to, let's just do -1. So we're still oversold. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at the day, that we don't actually oversell it. And let's just bring that back, because out of fairness there, we were just putting in the diagnostics time. So we're going to go -1. So the idea is you can see your inventory. Now we're at -3, which is okay because we had 5 hours of reserve time in. The purpose of reserve time is not to bring in more cars. The idea with the reserve time is to keep it reserved for the people that are already in your shop, that already have the appointment. And when this LOF turns into something else from the inspection, we borrow from reserve time for that. When this diagnosis is done of the fluid leak, then maybe we've got another hour or two that we can sell, because we know that they're going to most likely want it done today, depending on bay and part and technician availability, etc. In the case that it's just a brake inspection, again, you're just putting the brake inspection time. And again, you could do this in any shop. Well, I shouldn't say that. Some shop management systems do allow you to build reserve time in. Many don't. I have a customer, and I know what the numbers we just looked at for you, it doesn't sound like a lot, but this particular shop, he had his best month ever. Last July, he did $53,000 a month per technician. Now, his labor rate's 134, so even in Canadian perspectives, that's pretty high. Compared to California, it's low, but it's all relative to the area. It's all based on gross profit. You pay more for the tech, you have to charge more for the tech. You pay more for rent, you have to charge more for your labor rate. You pay more for all these other extra expenses. California is very expensive, so you need to charge more, and really the gross profit benchmarks are going to be the same. It doesn't matter if I'm training in Alberta or Ontario or California or Alaska, which I go to quite frequently, or wherever. We don't say what the labor rate should be. We say what your gross profit should be. So it changes from place to place based on that. But the benchmarks are the same. We want the same gross profit on labor regardless of where you're at. We want the same gross profit on parts. So that kind of thing changes. But he did 53,000, as I mentioned, and he did something really cool. He shut down his shop for a few days, and he sent all of his employees to Las Vegas to go to the SEMA show, which was a really neat thing for him to do for the employees. And I've done the numbers. There had to have been that particular month some work that was done in June that got paid for in July that made it look like July was a bit better. But he does do an average of $45,000 to $48,000 a month. He's one of the star performers that I've seen. He does it consistently, month after month after month. He was in a management group that I ran way back in the early 90s. I used to teach the same session as Bob O'Connor with technician time management, with the appointment schedule that looked like this, but it was paper and it was a whole pad. You probably remember it, Dave, and you could date 100 pages in advance, which we suggested so you can pre-book ahead. Well, he took this and put it into an electronic version of the same thing. Now, he has a very good shop management system. I won't mention the name of it, but it's a good shop management system. And I assumed that he wasn't using his spreadsheet anymore, his electronic version. And I spoke with Scott earlier this week, and I said, by the way, you still sell your software? Because he took the spreadsheet and put it into an electronic version that shows you this kind of information for as far out as the schedule, as far as you schedule a year out in some cases. And he said, yeah, I still use it. I said, but you don't use it in your shop management system? He said, no, because my shop management system does not allow me to see this information here in advance. He said, I can't even see it for the day. He said, it'll show how many technicians, and a lot of scheduling systems will show the schedule for the day. A customer's coming in at 8, another one's coming in at 9, one's coming in at 10. No, that's how a dentist books. That's how a hairdresser books. That is not how a repair shop books. We want most of our customers there to drop off the car the night before or the morning of, or bring the vehicle in hopefully before 10 o'clock so we can get the diagnosis done, the inspections done, and have a fairly decent day. So it's not about booking appointments every 2 hours or out or whatever. So a lot of shop management systems still to this day do not have a really good scheduling system. So I'm surprised that here's this brilliant shop owner that I've known for 20 some years. He's a star. In my opinion, he's a superstar. And he still uses this type, not electronic like we're looking at here, even though he could build it into a shop management system. So just so you know, he sent me the link to it, and I'm going to be doing a recording with him tomorrow. He's going to demonstrate how the software works, and I'm going to take that video and I'm going to send it out to everybody after it's done, everybody that took this training, I should say, and you can make a decision if you want to, buy. I don't even know how much it is. It's not much, but for what it does, it's absolutely a brilliant tool. And again, I was stunned when he told me this week, whereas I knew he was using the system, well, the handwritten system 20 years ago. He probably built the electronic system 7 years ago. And the fact that he still takes the time to go into a separate program to track his inventory and scheduling, and yet he has a very good shop management system, blows my mind. So all of that to say that when we're booking for the future, we do not want to oversell our days, and we don't want to undersell the days. The idea is to be able to schedule in advance. 70% is a really good number. I'm going to recommend, if you're not tracking your inventory in a day, you simply do what we're looking at here. You could use, and I'm sending the spreadsheet to you. If this is something you'd like to do just to see how it works at your shop, great. The idea is not just to see all the customers' names and the vehicles and the service. We have all that in our shop management system. But what I want to know is, how many hours do I have available? How many hours have I pre-sold? How many hours do I have left? Because way too many shops at the end of the day have too many cars left over. They didn't all get done, and they will take those vehicles and put them into the bays. And boy, with the labor at $168 an hour, I can't not do this. I have to. $168 an hour times 2 to factor in the parts, the labor, the sublet, the tires, the towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees. And sir, that's the highest technician time per minute value I've ever heard of. $5.60 a minute per technician. Wow. The average shop when I started training way back in the day was $1.50 a minute. And now we're talking $1.50 a minute, I should say, $5.60 a minute. So at the end of the day, to have one or two technicians go out to the lot, pull a car in, put it up on the lift, bring another car in at $5.60 a minute, and then in the morning you can't start work right away. You've got to go out there and get the cars out of the lifts and off the lifts, I should say, out of the bay, and so you've got a whole lot of time that's wasted. So we're going to now move into the pre-booking, but I did want us to understand what is labor inventory, how many hours available, and if you sold all the inventory and you're an awesome shop, you are cooking. And I know this because I've been doing this for a long time. When you sell more labor, you sell more parts and sublet and tires and towing and shop supplies, environmental fees, all like that. When I do training for part vendors, and I do quite a bit of it, I start the session by saying your average customer is buying half as many parts from you as they should. And I don't mean they're buying half from you and some from somebody else and some from somebody else. I'm saying that the average shop, because it only sells about half its labor inventory, is only buying about half of the parts and all the other things that could be sold along with that. One of my favorite people, and I'll be referring to him shortly here, his name was Rex. And he took a session of mine 20 years ago this past month. And now I'm training his son. I'm training a lot of sons of dads from years ago. I'm starting to feel old. But he told me, he said, Kelly, when I learned the importance of labor inventory, and I learned to go from selling 4 hours a day to 5 hours a day to 6 hours a day to 7 hours a day to 8 hours a day, he said the money just became right there. And he said, and all along with that, we sold all the extra things. And I learned, when you sell the labor and you focus on the labor inventory, you sell everything that goes along with that. And my hat's off to Bob O'Connor for teaching this material, because this was material that was being used by, excuse me, was being used by dealerships way back in the day, and Bob O'Connor was instrumental in bringing this valuable information about labor inventory and tracking labor inventory and using a time clock or a time system to be able to make sure that we track the time of the day. I'll give you one other quick example, and then I'm going to pull in the notes, and you've got the notes in front of you. I'm going to pull them up on the screen as well. And there's a shop that I wrote about for many, many years in a magazine called Canadian Technician. And just to let you know, I'm sending you an article that I wrote some time ago about this whole subject of labor inventory, and another one I'm going to send you. I wrote 80 articles over 100 actually, but for one particular magazine. And I wrote an article about labor inventory, so it'll kind of recap what I just covered there, and about pre-booking appointments. And quick story, we were a customer of the shop. His name's Errol. Errol's Automotive, Cochrane, Alberta. And one time I'd gone on a trip and I was away for a bit, I don't know, a week or something. And I come back and my wife picks me up at the airport, and it's late at night because I usually wanted to get home after the class that day. And so I come home, usually be a night. And she picks me up at the airport, and I usually drove home. So I got into the driver's seat and I'm driving, and I said, "Oh, the brakes are squeaking." "Oh," she said, "they are?" I said, "Yeah." She said, I didn't hear that. That's because she blares the radio. So I said, okay. So I called from my cell phone to Errol, and I said, "Here, Errol, it's Kelly. I just got back into town. Our brakes are squeaking. And can you get an appointment?" And I knew, and he'd get the message in the morning. And he called and he said, okay, to Carrie, my wife. He said, "We've made an appointment for you to come and get your brakes done." So she goes in. No, sorry. I go away, I think 4 or 5 days later for another trip. And I come back and my wife picks me up at the airport, and I'm noticing that the brakes are grinding. So I said, "Carrie, I'm just kind of curious what happened with the brakes, because they were supposed to be done." She said, "Oh, I forgot." She said, "I couldn't make the appointment. I called Errol and he said, okay, make sure you don't forget because they're just squeaking right now." And I phoned Errol and I said, "Well, you can probably hear the brakes in the background here." And I said, "We need to make another appointment." Long story short, I was in to see Errol. He said, "When that happened, Carrie canceled." He said, "I thought, boy, what if she forgets and I should remind her?" And he said, "I forgot and I feel somewhat responsible." Of course, he didn't give me a deal on the brakes, but or the rotors. But I said, "Errol, here's something that Carrie and I were talking about. It would be nice to get the vehicle fixed when I'm in town, and I know well in advance. I might get booked for a conference a year out, 6 months out, 3 months out. Nobody says, can you do a class next week?" So my schedule's pretty much in advance, usually for like a year at a time sometimes, especially for conferences. And my wife at the time was working 2 days a week. So she had said to me at one point, "Wouldn't it be nice to get the vehicle fixed when you're in town and I'm off?" I said, that makes sense. So I said, "Errol, it would be nice if we could," this is a true story, "it would be nice if we could make the appointments when I'm in town and Carrie's off." And he looked right at me and said, "Kelly," he said, "the reality is that you've only got 2 vehicles to look after, and we've got hundreds." And I looked at him, and I'm going to tell you, I was pissed off. I thought, what a stupid thing to say to a customer. I was not happy at all. So I paid my bill, and I'm driving home, and I'm mad. And I know I'm going to write an article, and you'll see the article that I did write about him. I thought, you're going to get back and write you in a national article what you just did to me. But when I got home, which is about a 5-minute drive, it occurred to me. I thought, I know what I'm going to do. So I pick up the phone, and I phone Errol. And he goes, "Arizona." I said, "Hey, Errol, it's Kelly." I said, "I'm curious about a couple things." I said, "Do you know when we got the tires on that van?" He said, "Just a second." He's checking his shop management system. And then I said, "How often do we get oil changes on our vehicle?" He said, "Well, let me take a look at that." He said, "Well," he said, "you take excuse me." He said, you get an oil change about every 7. Oh my God. He said, "No, you get an oil change about every 5 weeks." I said, "Isn't that amazing?" I said, "When did we get that alternator replaced in the Toyota?" And he said, "Stop, stop, stop. I know what you're doing to me." So what am I doing to you, Errol? I'm glad he figured it out. He said, "You're telling me that even though you only look after 2 vehicles and I look after hundreds, I know more about your vehicle than you do." I said, "Correct. You're the expert with my vehicle, just like the doctor is with the health, the dentist is with the teeth. So you tell me," and I didn't know this before, "that I get an oil change every 5 weeks. So tell you what, I'm going to be in town 5 weeks from now, and we can come in on Wednesday when Carrie's off." I said, "So we can make an appointment in advance." And he sent me an email that day, and it was an email reminder. I actually printed it off and framed it because I'd never received an email from a shop about an appointment that much in advance. And yeah, went for the appointment that day and it went great, and he never ever once did it again. But the point is that we can make it convenient for us and we can make it convenient for our customers. In the case of Errol, because he's a great shop, he would be behind. He'd say, Kelly, I'm booked ahead. 3 weeks I'm booked ahead. I said, no. If you've got appointments booked for the next 3 weeks, that does not mean you're 3 weeks ahead booking. That means you're 3 weeks behind repairing. So you think you're booked ahead, but you're actually behind 3 weeks and you haven't figured it out yet. So I guess I did sound like Bob O'Connor. I said, when you've got appointments like Jim Voigt in November for February and in December for March, that's pre-booking. And it's pretty much easy to book almost any type of work. And I find a lot of people think about oil changes, but that's only one part of it. Now, having said that, I don't know if you've seen, but I will be sending it out to you. I wrote an article just recently about the impact of idle time on a vehicle. And by the way, this is really important when it comes to pre-booking the next appointment, because a lot of people look at their mileage. I need an oil change in 3,000 miles or 5,000 kilometers. Okay, I need an oil change in 500 kilometers, 300 miles. The problem is, if your customer commutes a lot, they need more than that. And the article goes on to say that it's called the commuter's oil change. And I did some research and I wanted to find out, when an engine idles, how much of an impact is that on a vehicle? What's the equivalent of driving? And according to Ford, when a vehicle idles for 1 hour, it is the equivalent of 25 miles of driving or 40 kilometers. And you can do it. You can go online. You can do a Google search and find out for most major cities. Small towns, probably not, but you probably don't do much commuting anyway. But Los Angeles, no big surprise, is the highest in all of North America, with over 90 hours a year of idle time. In Canada, Vancouver's the winner there. The average person there spends 87 hours a year idle. We're not talking about commute time. This is not what we're talking about. It's not that you drive to and from work for an hour a day. Idle time is when was your car not moving, your wheels not turning, and your engine was running. And so 87 hours times 27 or 25 miles or 40 kilometers for many people becomes one more oil change a year. So we want to educate our customers not just based on mileage, but if you drive a lot. And by the way, the article itself, you can take it and edit it. I've had people say, I want to put it in my waiting room and see how my customers see it. I said, yeah, but it goes on and talks about how much extra revenue that could be for you selling those oil changes. But yeah, the first part of it makes sense. And I actually recommend in the article that you do a survey with your customers and ask them, how much time do you spend idling? So you could say, we've studied it for a month and we've tracked it, and our average customer is spending about 62 hours a year idling, which is harder on the engine than when you're driving. And that's why people, when they say a vehicle's for sale, that it's mostly highway miles because it's easier on the vehicle. So we need to get you in earlier. And if you think about it, planes, the engines are not tracked in miles, they're tracked in hours. Big boats are boats tracked in hours. Big trucks tracked in hours. Cars are tracked in in miles. And as most of you know, maybe all of you know, is that most vehicles today, Ford's been doing it for many, many years, you can see the hours on a vehicle. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if a customer can say, by the way, since the last time you were here, you put 3,200 miles on, but you also put this many hours on the vehicle. And I've seen some shop management software that you can show it in kilometers, of course, in Canada or any place else outside of the US, miles, and also in hours. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to educate our customers about more oil changes in a year, not because you're driving, the time in between or the mileage, but it's based on the intervals of hours as well. And I've actually had people do that. They do a survey and then they post it up, or maybe you've got a TV screen or a PowerPoint presentation educating your customers about all sorts of things. You could say, did you know that the average customer in this area drives and spends 87 hours a year idling, which means you need to get one more oil change a year. So just to let you know, I am going to be sending you that article as well. And I'll send you one on parts, but I'm not going to get into that right now because it's not specifically on the information we're looking at right here. So you should be able to see my screen, and we're taking a look at understanding labor inventory, and this is in the notes. And by the way, this is a session, I modified it in the last few days, but this particular session was written initially for Worldpac in 2012, and it was done for a conference. I used to speak at their expos, and if you've never been to a Worldpac expo, I highly recommend that you go. They're phenomenal. Understanding labor inventory. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I wanted to define what I showed you in the chart that said average, above average, and awesome. So it's very clear what the labor inventory is. And I can't say enough about labor inventory. Of all the things that I learned from Bob years ago, the thing that is the most valuable, the thing that I wish so many shop owners would grasp, is the ability to sell the labor that you have. And if you focus on that, and there's a lot of distractions, it's hard to focus. The average manager is interrupted 232 times a day. So how do you focus? But if you could realize labor is my inventory, I need to focus on selling labor. There's a fellow that is in our management group. He was actually on the session this afternoon, and he made some significant changes in the last 2 months. They've been in business for 25 years, something like that. They have a 10-bay shop, 13-bay shop actually in Chesapeake, Virginia. And he made some major changes. Just he's taking over for his dad. I'll just make that clear. And their labor sales in the last 2 months have been up $21,000, including the month of November when they were off for Thanksgiving, and they're usually open Saturday. So in that case, I believe they were closed Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, something like that. So less days, but they still did $21,000 more in November than they did in September, and it was the best 2 months of the entire year. Why? Because he started to focus on labor inventory. And what happened is the part sales went up, and the sublet sales went up, and the other sales went up as well. Of course, he also made some changes to gross profit, which is great. Just for the record, his sales went up $21,000 in the last 2 months on average. His cost of goods sold went up only about $3,000 because most of the technicians are paid hourly. There's one that's paid flat rate. So the difference in the increase for the cost of goods sold for that month for the technicians was the flat rate guys. Because if you're paying for 8 hours a day and only selling 6, and you learn how to sell that 7th hour on average a day, that's an additional gross profit of 100%. And I'm not saying labor's 100% gross profit, because that would mean the only way you can get 100% gross profit is to steal something or get it for free and sell it. Then you've got 100% gross profit. It's how much money is left over after you paid for what you sold. But when you're paying for the inventory anyway, and you're paying for 8 hours a day and only selling 5, well, when you sell that 6th hour, it goes right to the bottom line because you were paying for the expense anyway. So it was really neat to sit with him and look at his composite and see $21,000 increase in labor with only $3,000 a month increase in cost of goods sold. So almost all of that gross profit went right to the bottom line. The power of labor inventory is absolutely huge. And I assure you, when shops get this figured out and they start booking appointments in advance, what happens in such a short period of time? When I was looking at the income statement for the shop that I just mentioned, and I'm tracking their spreadsheet and looking at their numbers, I was almost bouncing off the wall. I mean, I'm a hyper guy to begin with. I drank too much coffee today, but I mean, I love doing these webinars, and you have to stay a little bit more pumped than in a live classroom. But to sit down and look month after month at how poorly that shop did for the beginning of the year, and to see the drastic improvements. In reality, back in January, that shop sold 56% of its inventory. And it was hard to say, but I said for the first several months of the year, you could have done the same sales with half as many people. So it's mind-boggling to see that when somebody has that ability. And one last story. I like to tell stories because they save a lot of time and make things very clear. The Errol that I'm talking about, and you'll see some of the articles that I'm sending to you are mentioned Errol. And just to let you know what happened is the editor for the magazine was at that session I mentioned in Las Vegas in 2005. And he asked me if I'd write for the magazine, and I said yes. And he came up with this idea, fictitious, that I owned a shop. A technician was working for me. He was my best tech. And one day he comes in and says, I'm quitting. I'm going to start my own shop. And he's not starting in the same neighborhood. It's not the same city. It's not like he's going to be a competitor against me. He's 300 kilometers away. So I'm sad to see him go because he's my best tech. But at the same time, he's a good guy and he's going to do well, hopefully. And an email comes to me, which of course I write, but this was the editor's idea, which I thought was brilliant. And it says, "Dear Kelly, I was working for you. I wasn't really all that happy. I thought I could make more money working for myself. I'm working harder. I'm making less. This thing's falling apart. I think I should just shut it down and come back and work for you." And my response is, "Errol, chill. All you need to do is learn some management things." So every month would be an email that I would write from him to me and answer those questions. Anyway, I was in his shop one day when I was first a new customer there, and when he found out what I did for a living, he wanted to buy me lunch, and we went for lunch that day. And funny, at the counter, he told me things are going well. And when we sat in this restaurant, he said, "I can't stand this." He said, "I was a technician. I was billing out 12 hours a day." He said, "I can't even do close to that with two technicians now." And he said, I can't pay my bills and I'm behind on my gross profit, or sorry, his gross profit was low. And so, long story short, I asked him some questions about gross profit and I gave him a matrix and we fixed that pretty quickly. But when we went back to the shop, he gave me a tour. And on the wall, there was a time clock. And the time clock had a sign above it that said goal 6 hours a day. And I knew exactly what it meant, but I wanted to ask him. I said, "What's the 6 hours a day, Errol?" And he said this: "If I could only get my guys to turn 8 hours a day." So what did he say? Two things. One, it's not happening. And two, it's the technician's fault. I mean, how could it possibly be Errol's fault? It's the technician's fault. If I could just get them to turn 6 hours a day. I said, "What do you use the time clock for?" He said, "Oh, well, they punch in the morning and they punch out for coffee break and they come punch out back from coffee break and punch out for lunch." I said, "Yeah, I get that. But do you have them punch in and out of each vehicle, or even better yet, each labor opportunity, or sorry, each labor operation?" He said, "No, actually, I talked to my techs about that and they didn't want to do it." And I said, "Really? How long have you been working for them?" This is a true story. I said, "Just a second." I walked outside of his building. I looked up at the building. I walked back in. I said, "I'm totally confused." And I guess this is where I got Bob O'Connor's genes from traveling with him. I said, "I'm confused because the sign says Errol's Automotive, but what you just told me is the techs are running the place, so it should be Errol's Techs Automotive." And the next time I called him, he answered, "Errol's Automotive." And I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm looking for Errol's Techs Automotive." But his techs did not want to do it. And having said that, for 13 years before Errol started Errol's Automotive, he was a technician in a Honda dealership in Calgary. And I said, "Was that your goal when you were a tech at the dealership? 6 hours a day?" He said, "No, 6 hours and a half a day." He said, "We had days where we'd do 9, 10, 12 hours, sometimes a little higher, but the average was 11 or 12 hours a day." I said, "But now it's Errol's shop." I said, "You don't use the time clock properly." He wasn't tracking productivity. He wasn't tracking efficiency. He wasn't tracking proficiency. And the reason he didn't want the time clock is he said to me, "It's a Big Brother system." I said, "No, you're using it as a Big Brother system. They punch in when they get there, so you know if they're late. They punch out for coffee break. They punch out so you can see if they took too long of a coffee break. You want to know if they came back from lunch and you want to know what time they left. That's Big Brother." I said, "But when they punch in and out of each labor opportunity and you find out why you're only selling 4 or 5 hours a day and your goal is 6, you know it, Errol. You know you can bill out 12 hours in a day." Now, dealerships have an advantage. They've got the same kind of vehicle going in and out every day. I think it's harder to be a technician in an independent repair shop than it is certainly in a dealership, because dealerships have one animal and we have the entire zoo. I've actually said that being a technician in an independent repair shop is more challenging to be a doctor, because how many models does the doctor work on? Two. Now, I've been to Southern California, Northern California, and it's probably two and a quarter, what I call the hybrids. I'm recording this. I probably shouldn't have said that, but I will. And I say to people, how often do those models change? Year after year, they don't. But a car might have 300 changes in a year. They'll make changes mid-year of the vehicle. And we need to look at, okay, that was last year's vehicle. How many changes have they made? And, with humans, other than a few aftermarket parts that we're familiar with, those models don't change from year to year. So we need to be able to keep up with that kind of stuff. Anyway, back to this, got to put a little bit of humor into this. Productivity, we already know, is how much time of the day a technician spends working on income-producing work. Our goal is 90%. The highest it could be is 100. Efficiency and proficiency. So I wanted to put the definitions in here for you. Productivity is simply the amount of time a technician spends actually working on income producing work. How do you calculate it? The actual time. How much time did they spend working on these vehicles? How many hours were they there? And our goal is 90%. Efficiency, I already said, is how fast the technician is. The calculation is the sold time. How much time do we get paid for in hours today? How much time do we spend actually working on vehicles? The benchmark here is 125%. And proficiency is the percentage of time that was sold. So the percentage of the inventory that was sold. So again, if you bought 8 spark plugs and sold 4 and there's none left, you only sold 50% of your inventory. Our goal, just so you know, is to sell 9 hours a day for every 8 available. So if you do the math, 9 hours sold, 8 available is 112%. We'd like to see you sell 112% of your time. If you don't do good scheduling, my experience tells me you will not be able to sell that much inventory. If you can control your schedule, if you can control your labor inventory, if you can prevent overbooking the day and underbooking the day. My experience is most shops don't have a car count problem. They have a problem making every car count. Next point I want to make is each day your job on your counter is E&A, E&A, E&A. If you're an owner and you're on the counter, you E&A all day. If you're a service advisor, you E&A. If you're a technician filling in on the counter when somebody's gone for lunch or whatever, E&A. And the E is educate and the A is advise. Every single day you educate and you advise. And the reason that's important in pre-booking appointments, and you're going to hear it in the interview that I did with Jim this week, is that he explains the benefit to the customer so clearly that they realize that this is great for them. It's not just great for the shop, of course it is. I had a dentist appointment this morning. That appointment was made a long time ago. They booked it, I don't even know how long ago. They sent me an email the week before. They sent me a text the day before, and they sent me a text the morning of. I said to them, that's awesome that you do that. She said, well, Kelly, not everybody likes that. Some people get upset. But I said, look, it's good for you. It's good for the customer. And if some people aren't happy about it, great. But the fact that we live in a very busy world, we're so busy, we've got so many things on our brain, and the fact that you remind me, and I said, honestly, I don't even have to keep your little card that tells me when I'm coming in because I know from my experience dealing with dentists that you are going to remind me and you're going to educate me that if I look after my teeth, I'm going to need less root canals, I'm going to need less fillings, I'm going to maybe not need false teeth. So your job is to E&A every day. And just today, by the way, I thought I would add this page into this topic because we need to educate our customers about maintenance. The bulk of what you're going to be pre-booking is maintenance. It's not repair. It's pre-repair. It's maintenance. Dentists truly don't pre-book appointments. Hygienists pre-book appointments. When you need your teeth cleaned, it's the hygienist, not the dentist. You go to your dentist office, there might be 1 or 2 dentists and 3 or 4 hygienists, whatever the local law allows them to have. The doctor only, or dentist only does what the dentist can do that nobody else can do by law. When you need your teeth cleaned, and I'm sure you've experienced it, certainly the dentists I've dealt with, they're looking for an appointment 6 months out, a year out, and they think, okay, that day you need to see the dentist as well, and so let's see if we can find. And I was looking at it the other day when I was in the dentist's office a few weeks back, whatever it was, and I'm looking at all this color coding and all this scheduling. I thought, wow, you guys have got this down to a science. And she looked at me and said, okay, I need to see you, but the dentist needs to see you, so we can't commit. Would Wednesday work for you? I said, well, Wednesday's a really busy day for me. She said, okay, how about Friday at 9 o'clock? And I thought, you are finding a spot to plug me in. In most repair shops, if I said, can I get an appointment 3 months from now? Absolutely. We want to be pre-booking appointments, and I'm going to give you some examples and proof that people have. When it comes down to maintenance, because you're pre-booking maintenance, if you wanted to get into your dentist today or the day of to get cleaning done, it's probably not going to happen. They may put you on the short list, and you might get lucky and get in a week or so, but the maintenance is booked well in advance. But when you've got a toothache that's so bad you can't even think, they're going to take you in now, and the dentist is going to work on you, and you're going to pay extra fees because of the rush, and you're paying higher amounts for the dentist. Why? Because the dentist is the diagnostician and the repair tech. And they're the ones that do the expensive stuff because they're the expensive people. And that work is not booked in advance. They typically do, some of it is, but they typically do the repair work. And so you can't pre-book that. You can pre-book a cleaning for 6 months, but you don't say, your teeth is going to start to decay and you're going to need a root canal in January, so let's see you in December. It doesn't work that way. So I was wrong when I used to say dentists pre-book, dentists don't pre-book, hygienists do. So when it comes down to maintaining our teeth, they educate us, they give us a toothbrush and the floss and all that stuff. We need to educate our customers. We need to educate and advise and let them know why they want to take care of the vehicle. One of the best approaches in pre-booking appointments is to go to Mitchell on Demand, or ALLDATA, and take a look at what the next factory recommended service is. It doesn't matter what vehicle it is. Every 3,000 miles or every 5,000 kilometers, there are services that repeat themselves over the life of the vehicle. And I stress that because I've had people say, dealerships can pre-book because they have the same kind of vehicles and they have all the schedules. Well, I'm sure the person who sold you ALLDATA or Mitchell or both told you that you can sell enough maintenance using those to actually pay for the software itself. And yet I see very few people using it to sell maintenance. All we need to do is know what the mileage is on the vehicle and print it off in advance and point out to the customer at the end of the day, here's your invoice. By the way, the manufacturer recommends at X number of thousands of miles that your timing belt is replaced. And you want to do that because if it breaks and you've got an interference engine, you've got a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to deal with. So we're making an appointment for you based on how much you drive. You're going to need that timing belt based on maintenance in approximately 3 weeks or 3 months or 4 months or 8 weeks, whatever it is. You can do that for all sorts of things. A timing belt is just one example. But you need to sell it to the customer. And again, I can't stress this enough. When you hear Jim talk, he is so good at explaining to his customer what they should be doing. Now you're going to hear him. He's a bit deadpan. He's not an excited, lively, up to beat person. He's kind of hard to read in many ways, but he's brilliant. And I tell you, and I don't exaggerate this, of all the management groups I've run them in the US, I've run them in Canada, all across the US. This guy's the king of implementation. He was the kind of guy that would sit in the class, kind of unassuming, quite quiet, take notes, go back, come back a month later and said, I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. And we'd stare at him thinking, oh my God, like you've made all those changes in the last month. You will find that some people will question whether they had an appointment or not. I've had some people say, well, I told the customer about an appointment and they said, okay. And then we called them 2 weeks before or 5 days before or 10 days before or whatever. And they go, I don't have an appointment. It's because you actually didn't make it strong enough. I had a client in Modesto, California, who said, I don't have a lot of confidence in this. And so when I ask the people, I know they can tell in my voice that I really don't want. I'm not feeling comfortable, I should say. And he said, I asked one lady if she'd be interested. She said, absolutely. Why have you guys never done that before? My dentist has been doing it for years. And he thought, okay. But he felt like he never had the confidence. And one thing he did, he told me this. He said, the next time I went to the dentist, I thought, I'm going to listen. Why? What do they say? Like, what are the words to say? Because to actually ask somebody to make an appointment 3 months out might seem a little, too presumptuous. He said, so I got everything on, I got the work done, and then I paid her, and I'm waiting for her. What's she going to say? And she said, let's go ahead and make her next appointment. She didn't say, would you like to make your next appointment? When do you think you'd like to come in? She said, let's go ahead and make your next appointment. Anyway, then you explain the benefits. So when a person's going to maintain the vehicle, they're going to maintain the vehicle's warranty, which is extremely important to a lot of people if the vehicle is still under warranty. It's going to increase the longevity of the vehicle. You wanted this vehicle to last longer? Take care of it. It's going to increase the resale value of the vehicle. And I find it interesting when at your shop, you might have two vehicles on the lot, about the same year, same make, same model. One's in mint condition, the other's a piece of crap. Somebody goes to sell a vehicle, you see it advertised, you go out and look at it and think, you've got to be kidding. Like, this is just not a well looked after vehicle. My son, by the way, traveled with me sometimes, and he would help teach sometimes, and he was a service advisor for 3 years. And it would be so funny because he was so educated about this whole thing about maintenance. We'd be driving down the road and he'd see a car beside us that you could just tell brake dust all over the place, and they don't look after the car. He'd say, hey, that's not a maintenance customer, is it, Dad? Yeah, you're right, Scott, it's not. Longevity, the vehicle's going to last longer if we take care of it better. It's going to increase the resale value when you go to sell it. And one thing I recommend is that you have the Kelly Blue Book hotkeyed on your computer. And so you can say to a customer, by the way, this vehicle, year, make, and model, in this condition is worth this much money. And you can bear rough to clean or extra clean. And you can show them the difference between a well-maintained vehicle and what it's going to be worth when they go to sell it and one that's not. You can certainly reduce the risk and hassle of a breakdown. You can provide increased safety, certainly a lot more peace of mind. Definitely gas consumption. Gas is extremely expensive. We can help people reduce gas. And of course, the pride of ownership, that when you go to lend somebody your vehicle, you're not embarrassed in all the instructions you need to give. This is another thing I just decided actually today to add to the notes that I was going to use. And I just want to show you, and I'm going to go through this quickly because it's not a training session on all the steps. But I want to show you that one of the steps every time, every day, every customer should be pre-booking appointments. And I want to encourage you, starting tomorrow or today, whatever time you're listening to this, do not say to a customer, we'll see you next time. What does that mean? We'll see you next time. They sometimes say, hopefully not too soon, because you're as painful as the dentist. See you next time. What does that really mean? The next time your car breaks down, hopefully you're close to us and we can fix it for you. You wouldn't believe how many people have said to me, I caught myself after the class, days later, weeks later, and every time I look at somebody and say, see you next time, I'm thinking, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to tell them when it's going to be. And I've always thought it was weird as a customer to get an oil change, drive away with an oil change sticker that tells me approximately the mileage, 5,000 kilometers out, and approximately the day. And I thought, you know I need it to be done. You know approximately when it's going to be. Why didn't you make an appointment? Now this is just a reminder, that I should make an appointment? Whereas the oil change sticker can tell them the day or the week that they're coming back in. And it's not a reminder to make an appointment. It's a reminder that they have an appointment. So the steps are pretty simple. The telephone call to the shop, then you get them off the phone into the shop. They're now standing at the counter. You're educating and advising the customer. You do some estimating. You secure the sale. You do a follow-up call with the customer to tell them what they need. They arrive back at the shop, or sell the work, write it right, as we call it. Arrival back at the shop, and always sell the next appointment. And I wanted to make this very clear. Selling is necessary in selling the next appointment. It's not just making the appointment. You're not order taking. You're actually selling it. And then, of course, with the repair, we follow up for satisfaction, make sure they were satisfied. And then point number 11 is you need to follow up on that pre-booked appointment. Who pre-books appointments? Lots of businesses today pre-book appointments. And again, I've mentioned hygienists do, dentists don't. Dog groomers. I had a shop owner whose wife actually does dog grooming in their home, and he wasn't pre-booking appointments, but we went to his house for lunch that day, and his wife was just finishing up one of the dogs, and this lady came, and she said, okay, here you go. And she said, oh, yeah, I need that because I know when I want to get this done that you're too busy. And I thought, here's your wife pre-booking the next dog grooming, which, by the way, do some Google search on that and see how profitable dog grooming is. And anyway, they pre-booked that appointment for the dog groomer. Hairdressers, so you get the person that you want. Furnace cleaning companies say, hey, you need your furnace cleaned again. I lived in the company. I'm glad septic companies were on their game. Chiropractors do, massage therapists do, even funeral homes do. You can pre-book your funeral and even pay for it. Of course, you can't exactly give them a date, but bottom line is pre-booking the next appointment is one of the most powerful marketing tools at your disposal. It doesn't cost you anything unless you get some business card size things made that you give them, which is going to cost you 10 or 15 bucks. Put some color in it, might cost you 20. What it takes is consistency, and it takes discipline. And again, the next pre-booking needs to be sold. So how do we pre-book the next appointment? I want to give you some tips. And I'm going to give you some examples of 3 different people that do it slightly differently. It doesn't mean there's only one way to do it. You need to work with what you feel comfortable with. Our recommendation is you start and plant the seed with the customer when they drop off the vehicle in the morning. Now, if they didn't drop off the vehicle when you were there, then you're not going to have a chance to do this. But if they're at the counter with you in the morning, we suggest that you mention to the customer all the things that you do and say, we'll be calling you with the results of the brake inspection. By the way, we'll be making your next appointment as well. Can I get your keys? Do you need a ride to work? So you do whatever you're doing anyway. And that's why I showed you the steps earlier. one of the steps should always be making that next appointment. And by the way, you can promote that whole thing with promote it on your website, your night Dropbox, talking about pre-booking appointments. You can make it part of your mission statement as well. Number 2 is you plant the seed when you call the customer. So I'm calling in and say, hey, David Kelly calling from the shop. We did the brake inspection, and here's what you need to have done, and here's what needs to be done, and here's why it needs to be done, and here's how much it's going to cost. And we can do it for you. It's only $342.52. And you say, okay, go ahead and do that. When will it be ready? I'll tell you what, it'll be ready no later than 5 o'clock. If you'd like, I can text you or whatever when it's done. And by the way, we'll be making your next appointment as well. Now, they probably won't ask any questions, but if they do, you can explain it. But the idea is you've planted the seed. So they heard something about this appointment, but maybe they didn't ask. If they did, you can explain it. And number 3 is you inform the customer that you pre-booked the next appointment. Why? Because it's the E and the A, the educate and advise. The biggest mistake, and I've seen it too many times, the biggest mistake that people make when they try to book appointments is they ask the customer instead of telling the customer. And I know telling sounds forceful and it sounds like you're trying to sell timeshares. It's not. It's still a subtle sale, but it's something that you tell them, you don't ask them. Because if I say, Ted, how would you like if we made your appointment to come back in September to do this? Well, I don't know where I'm going to be in September. Or you say, hey, Dave, you're going to need a timing belt replaced, and so I've gone ahead. Well, actually, would it be okay with you? When you lighten it, when you soften it, it takes away the urgency. So if you say, we made an appointment for you to come back on Tuesday, June 8th, and you go, I don't know where I'm going to be Tuesday, June 8th. And I look at you and say, I know where you're going to be, Dave, on June 8th. You're going to be standing right here giving me some money. That's where you're going to be. Of course, I'm kidding. You don't say that. But you say the timing belt is such an important thing. And if it was to break with your interference engine, it could cost you a massive amount of money. So I've made the appointment approximately a little bit before it would be due to make sure that we take care of that before it breaks. Quick story. A fellow in Ontario, very close to the shop that you're going to hear from the interview from Jim Voigt, had a customer who he said, by the way, your timing belt really needs to be replaced. You're actually over on it. He said, I'm going to let it stretch a little bit. How much notice does a timing belt give you that it's going to go? Most people say none. I say, no, it gives you about 60,000 miles or 90,000 miles. And then after that, you're on a wing and a prayer. True story, that particular customer ended up going across the border because he lived in Toronto, very close to the U.S. border. Probably went down to do some shopping or something, and his timing belt broke on his interference engine in the United States. He didn't know what to do. He thought, I'm going to get it towed back, which he didn't realize was going to be a hassle because he had to phone the towing company and find out which tow truck driver that they had actually had a passport, because even a tow truck driver can't get across the border towing a vehicle without a passport. So he was delayed trying to find a tow truck driver that could leave the country. And he had it towed back, and he brought it back to the shop. He said, I should have listened to you. I should have listened to you. So we need to do our customers a favor. They make the decision. It's their money. But we educate and we advise. A couple of the reasons that you could use to customize for their needs is a person who typically goes over in the oil change. So one of the things we recommend for at least 2 weeks, maybe a month, and a month is ideal, is to say to your customers, okay, tell you what, for the month of January, what I'm going to ask you, every time you do an oil change, instead of taking the oil change sticker off and throwing it away, can you put it into this little basket here, bucket or whatever? And what I'd like you to do is write down what the mileage was that day when it came in. So at the end of the month or 2 week period, whatever it is, you take all of those oil change stickers and count them. Find out how many are yours and how many are from other shops. Are 60% of your customers getting the oil changes done at your shop? Is it 70? Is it 80? Is it 90? Is it 40? And you would be able to know what percentage of your customers come to your shop for everything and they don't go to a quick lube. The other thing that you do is just quickly track how much they were over or under or at. So you could do your own survey in your area, and you can actually say, by the way, we've tracked it, and the average customer in this area goes over 2,000 miles or 1,000 miles or goes over by 2 months or 3 months or whatever. Yes, there's people that are religious about it. They're going to be there regardless. But the idea is that you educate yourself so that you can educate the customer and say, we've tracked it, and we find that the average person goes over, and we want to prevent that. So we've gone ahead and made your next oil change appointment so you don't end up going over without making them feel stupid. You don't say, oh, you went over an oil change again. You say, you know what? I noticed you went over an oil change. Let me tell you, I've done it a ton of times myself. Life gets busy, 3 kids, 8 sporting events a week. Tell you what I've done. I've made an appointment for you. You're not going to go over this time. We're going to call you the week before. It could be prior to the next season. One of the things that Jim Voigt has done for several years is he wants his customers educated about seasons, especially up here in Canada. So when he books their next appointment, it's the next season. And he has taught his customers for years, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter. If you don't drive a lot, it doesn't matter. We still need to see you 4 times a year. And if we see you 4 times a year and he goes back to the benefits of maintaining the vehicle, your vehicle's going to last longer, all of these things. And so what he does is he books it. So he'll say, we've booked your summer appointment, we've booked your fall appointment. And I know in some of you listening to this, you don't do tire swaps in the wintertime, but in Canada, it's huge. In the province of Quebec, which is the largest province in the whole country, not as many people as California, of course, but in Quebec, the law is you must have winter tires. It is the law. So in November, shops go absolutely nuts. One of my clients I mentioned earlier, Rex Sarzen, here's what he did last year, and I don't make up stories. He sent an email to his entire database on October 1st, and it said, winter is coming. It always does. And I don't know why us Canadians are surprised when the snow flies, because I'm 55 years old, and winter has never forgot to come. It has always, always come. And a lot of people think, oh, I need snow tires because it started to snow. In reality, snow tires are also based on temperature, not just based on actual snow. And unfortunately, a lot of people think, oh, I've got all season tires. I've got tires for the winter. We need to explain, really, they're 3 season tires. They're not 4 season tires. So what Rex did is he sent an email to his entire database. And if you don't have a really good collection of your customers' email addresses, get them. Secure as many email addresses as you can. All you need to do is say, tell you what we'd like to do is get your email address so we can make you aware of promotions and specials and coupons. There needs to be, for some people, a benefit. Why am I giving you the email address? I think a good example of that is Staples. If you go to the Staples website on a new computer or a new browser and it doesn't recognize your IP address, it will pop up and say, give us your email address or we're going to give you a $10 coupon. Now, it used to be $10 off anything over $100, but now it's $10 off paper or something specific. But regardless, it doesn't matter. They're telling you, give us your email address, we're going to give you $10. I think we should explain to the customer why we want the email address, and we're not going to abuse it. I can't stand when you go online and sign up for something. I bought some bedding, for example, from a company called Casper. They're great. I love them. It's great stuff, but I only bought 2 things, and you don't buy bedding all that often. And I was getting 2 emails every single week, and I said, no, stop. And I don't know about you, but Google, I think, is driving us crazy. You look at something, and the next time you check your email, the ad is there for Casper. Almost every time I check my email, you go to Staples, you're looking at something, and now they got the technology. You forgot something in your cart because you were going to buy something, and it triggers an email. It's kind of out of control. We don't want to add stress to people's lives, but we do want to make them aware of the promotion that we have, in this case for tires. So he sent, and again, I don't make stuff up. The email went out October 1st. The phone started ringing that day. People got the email and go, oh, I should do this. What did the email say? Winter's coming. You should avoid the winter rush. We want to be able to accommodate you in the day that you need to be helped. As you know, November is overwhelming. We're going to encourage you to make your appointment prior to the end of October. And if you do, in that case, they were giving people a high-quality snow brush, and they were going to put their name in the draw for winter tire storage for the winter. And I was talking to an American today. He said, until I heard this, I'd never heard of this winter tire stuff. You can Google it. In Toronto, Ontario, Canada, there's a place called the Tire Hotel, and they store 20,000 sets of tires every season. That's how big the business is up here. Anyway, long story short, and again, I don't make stuff up, 98% of the people had their tires, winter tires, put on before November even came. So instead of going crazy in November, they had a phenomenal October, and November allowed them to do a lot more things. Too many shops winter season comes, they think it's good. You know what it is? It's a lot of activity. It's a lot of gross dollars without a whole lot of gross profit. We track it in our spreadsheets. I see some people November is the highest sales of the whole year, and I've never seen it the lowest gross profit, but oftentimes I've seen it the second lowest gross profit of the month. The point was people came in. Why? Because they were asked to. And when you have the tires taken off and the winter's put on, and you come back, sorry, that day when you pick up your vehicle, your winter tires are on, they make your appointment for you to come back to have them taken off. And when you go back to have them taken off, they actually make an appointment to come back. And they've even taken it further in these places that store tires. And I'm going to mention this because some of the people listening do store tires. One thing that Rex did is he had all these tires in storage, 104 sets, I believe. Not 104 tires, 104 sets of tires. And what he decided to do is during the slow season in the summer, he had his tire guy, who was hourly anyway, balance every single one of the tires that was on wheels or rims. And when people would come back in, say, okay, by the way, would you like your tires balanced? And I don't make stuff up. I was training in his facility on his second floor with two of his advisors in the room. And I said, you're doing this right now for the first time, like this a couple of years ago. How many people have said no? And she said, nobody yet. Everybody said, oh yeah, go ahead and balance them. Well, instead of being busy and balancing all these tires and putting them on and you're crazy anyway, every tire had been balanced. And they decided if somebody said, no, don't want them balanced, they'd say, okay, then we'll tell you what, we're going to take care of it for you because it's already done. So anyway, I think it's brilliant that they were using the labor inventory in the slower times so that during the busier times, some of the work was already pre-done. So prior to the next season, again, we talked about the next scheduled maintenance, and I think back to school is another one. And point number 4 is to follow up with an email, a letter, a postcard, or a text that we have to remind these people. So again, the 4 steps: plant the seed in the morning, plant the seed when you call them about whatever the results are of the car, when it'll be ready, how much it's going to be, whatever. You tell them when they come back in, and of course you make that follow up. A couple other neat little tricks that I've seen. One of my clients had this idea that he would have toothbrushes that he got from his dentist, in this case helping promote the dentist, but I've actually seen people have toothbrushes printed with their company logos on them. And this one particular fellow had this idea to educate people instantly. And I was at his shop one day, his name's Ed, and Protect Tire, and I was watching him, and a lady came at the end of the day, and she picked up her car, and he explained what he did, and all the stuff was done, and they test drove, and everything's good, and he said, and here's your bill. It's exactly what we said. She paid the bill. He hands her receipt and handed her a toothbrush. And I saw her staring at the toothbrush. She said, what is this for? He said, we're like the dentist. We've already gone ahead and made your next appointment. Later on that year, I was speaking in Las Vegas again at the Cars Convention. In this case, it was sponsored by Worldpac and CarQuest. Worldpac had just been bought by CarQuest prior to that. And I said to the people from Worldpac, I said, you know what would be neat? Because I'm going to talk about pre-booking appointments. Do you think you can get toothbrushes made with the logos on them? And you wouldn't believe how many people said, the first time I've ever seen the CarQuest and Worldpac logo, again, this is back in the day, the only time I've ever seen both logos on one thing was your toothbrush in Las Vegas. And here's what happened. People came in the morning. The workbook's already there. I like things organized and got some mints or some chocolates and all that. It looks really nice. People sit down and go, wow, this is cool. But there's also a toothbrush there. So a couple of people said, what's with the toothbrush? I said, well, you're in Vegas. You probably stayed up all night last night and you didn't brush your teeth. So we thought because you're sitting beside somebody, you should. Of course, it was a joke. And literally at the end of the day, I had Ed and his wife come up. And I said, I interviewed 3 or 4 people that day as part of my presentation. And I said, Ed, you're the guy that did the toothbrush thing. Can you explain to people why there's a toothbrush at their seat? He said, it's simple. We give people a toothbrush and we say, we're like the dentist. We've gone ahead and made your next appointment. So instead of educating people, explaining things to people, they see the toothbrush and go, oh, I get it. One shop that I was at, they do a cash spiff for their employees. This was a shop in Moncton, New Brunswick. I like to be accurate about things. And they had 2 employees, and they said, here's what we're going to do. For every appointment that you have pre-booked, we're going to give you $1. Now, that's not a lot, but at the end of the week, when they get the cash, it's nice. But what they also did is they had a chart. So each one of them would track And at the end of the week, one of the two employees who had the most pre-booked appointments actually got a gift certificate for a restaurant of their choice. So yes, they got a cash spiff. Okay, I got 3 appointments pre-booked today. I got 4. So they made it a game. It wasn't just about the dollar. It was about who would win the contest. Another example, I had a shop owner in Seattle who was in the management group that I had with Worldpac, and that group still exists till this day. It's neat to see that. We were having our meeting online reviewing our composite, and he said, Kelly, he said, oh my God, he said, I wish we weren't doing this meeting today because he's going to catch up to me. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, we have an arrangement. He said, me and my advisor, whoever has the least amount of pre-booked appointments has to buy the other person lunch on that Friday. And he said, we're so close right now, and I know that he can catch up to me during this call. And so we're on the call and we're reviewing the composite. He goes, stink. He said he just came in and he showed me his finger, not the middle finger, but in other words, I got another one. And he's just rubbing it in. And he said, he's got another one. He's catching up to me. I'm going to have to buy him lunch. So they made it a game. One shop I thought was kind of a cool idea, and I forgot about this one until I read this earlier, is one guy had these mystery envelopes, and he just had these envelopes, and he would say to the customer, tell you what, we've made your next appointment, and here's what I'd like you to do, and he flip them out and say, fan them out, which of these envelopes would you like when you come in next time? So they would choose one of those, and he'd say one of them is a tablet, and one is whatever, and so the customer would say, I'll take this one. So, okay, when you come back on October 2nd, you're going to be open up and see what you got. I thought that was kind of cool. I had one shop that what they did is they gave people a really nice high quality ice scraper, not really much of a demand for that in some areas. But one other shop, when the customer pre-booked their appointment, they gave them a nice quality keychain, not just some cheapo. And then, so the other points you want to follow up for satisfaction is the other points we were talking about earlier, and you also want to make sure that you follow up on the appointment. So what I want to do, I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but here's a gentleman, not the one that I mentioned. I've read a letter in Vegas. This is another shop. His name's Ron Tremblay. And Ron Tremblay runs a fourth generation shop now in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm not going to read the whole email to you. And what he did, and you can tell by this email that he sent me, that this guy is a detail-oriented guy. In fact, he's one of he didn't say Ron, he said Ron Tremblay at the end. He is one of the most OCD, anal retentive people I know, and it works for him. So he wrote this, and I'm just going to read the beginning. He said, about a year ago, Kelly Bennett informed me that I had become one of the many shop owners that he bestowed the title of King of Pre-Booking Appointments. At the time, I was oblivious to how big of a deal it was, honored just at the title. So he says that I was going to here in Las Vegas. He spelled that incorrectly. But anyway, so again, I was speaking in Vegas the first week in November of this particular year. So he says, today, October 27th, my business has 815 pre-booked appointments between now and the end of March. Our goal is 1,500 for every 5-month window. So he looks at 5 months windows with slots for drop-in customers. So what he's saying is he's leaving about 1/3 of his space available for drop-in customers or the extra work that they find on the vehicles that day, or for people who want more work done. He goes on, and I'm not going to read it all, but at 815 hours, he's really good at selling. He does a lot of scheduled maintenance and repairs, more than repairs, I should say. He does sell almost 3 hours per repair order consistently. So what he did is he took 815 appointments times $500, $407,000 that he considered was already pre-sold before March even came along. So when I say that this stuff works, there's no question about it. And I'm not going to read the rest of that email from him. But I can tell you, when Ron started pre-booking appointments, what happened was, he told me 67% of the people keep the appointments. I mentioned that in a class one time. I said 67% of people keep the appointments for the day. Some change it to another day. But one guy said, oh, so 32% of the people don't even show up? I said, well, I'd rather have 67% of people show up than 100% of nobody. And maybe it'll be 50% of people that'll keep the appointment. It'll be 60 and 70. If you asked Ron Tremblay today, he still runs his shop. He does a great job. In fact, as he does coaching on weekends like I do, he does that as a part-time job. He would tell you that over 90% of the people keep the appointment for the day. And what he does is sends an email in advance. Jim Voigt, I'm just going to make clear, even though you're going to hear the interview, Jim Voigt has been doing this since 1 year before this guy. And what he does, which I think is really unique, is he used to do it 5 days out. I don't know why, but he chose 5 days out. He would phone people 5 days out. And for whatever reason, he's decided over the last couple of years to change that. So what he does is 10 days before that appointment is booked, well in advance, it might be March, it might be April, 10 days prior, so every day, email goes out to people that are booked 10 days out. He sends an email that says, just want to remind you that you have your appointment next week for your oil change, your tire rotation, your 60,000 K service, your timing belt, your brakes, whatever it was. Maybe the brakes today, they don't need to be done, but in about 8 weeks, you're going to need brakes. So let's go ahead and make an appointment. We've gone ahead and made an appointment 7 weeks. So what he does, he sends an email 10 days out, and then I believe it's a phone call that he makes 2 days out. Now, it might be an email. I'm not positive about that. I'd have to think back to the interview. You can hear it anyway. But 10 days out and 2 days out. 10 days out simply to remind them so they don't think, oh, it's 2 days from now. I recall being home one time listening to a voicemail on the answer machine back in the day, voicemail. It was from the dentist. And I said to my wife, I said, Dustin has a dentist appointment tomorrow. She said, no, it's next week. I said, well, they called today. She said, oh, yeah, they never call the day before anymore. So the next time I was in to see my dentist, I said, Dr. Ziegenhagel, I said, you guys called earlier. He said, oh, come on. He said, you have to. He said, I started in this business. You call people and say tomorrow, and they, oh, yeah, I'll be there. He said, now you call them the day before and they go, no, not tomorrow already. It's been 6 months already. You're kidding, not tomorrow. I can't. There's no way I can make it tomorrow. I got stuff going on. So he says, we call people 5 days out. That's the strategy that they learned. But anyway, how Jim does it, his choice, 10 days out, 2 days out. And then what he does is he orders the parts from his part vendor 2 days out. And he knows that the parts are going to arrive. And for the most part, not in a perfect world, but in most part, the parts are going to be there. I was in his town one day. I was actually staying in his family's home. And he said, I wanted to stop by the Napa store because he wants to do higher use of some training. So I go into the store with Jim. He said, you're his coach? And I said, yes, sir. He said, thank you. He said, I wish every one of my customers learned how to pre-book like he does because he's not in a big hurry for the parts in most cases. Now, sometimes, yeah, that happens. But he said he's pre-ordering stuff so much in advance. He said, well, tomorrow would be nice, but 2 days would we need 2 days rather than I need it 2 hours from now for the most part. Another one, Rex Sarson. I mentioned him earlier. I recall 20 years ago, this past November, so just this past month, teaching a session that he was at, Rex Sarson, and now his son works for him. So again, I'm feeling old. But I remember very clearly teaching Bob O'Connor's material, and Bob O'Connor had a line in there in the service advisor class that said at the end of the presentation with the customer, everything you've done, you give them the keys, always make their next appointment. That's what it said. Now, it didn't go into all this detail like this, but it did say make the next appointment. And this guy, Rex, says, yeah, what if it's just for an oil change? I said, especially if it's just for an oil change. What's an LOF? He said, lube oil filter. I said, no, it's a labor opportunity of the future. And if you can get people loyal with their oil changes and you're selling 3 hours in a row like this Ron Tremblay guy is, it's not just an oil change. It's a possibility of a 3 hour or 3 hours an hour oil repair order. The more loyal people get with the oil changes, the more work we're going to do. Take a look at Quick Lubes. An average sticker price for a Quick Lube, $49. I went to a Quick Lube not that long ago for the experience. I wanted to experience what it was like. People say they go to Quick Lubes because it's faster and it's cheaper. In this case, it was neither. I went there. There was 3 vehicles in front of me. And by the way, 2 people went up and said, "Are we able to come back?" And both times very clean. No, sir, you're gonna have to get back in the line. That's the way it works. But you're sitting there in your car, and they walk up with a bottle of water. Would you like some water? And would you like a newspaper? And I think, oh, this is good. And then they tell you, it's not which aisle you're in. Don't worry about what row you're in. You pay attention, and when it's your turn, you take any of those 3. Oh, okay. And so I go in, and the next thing you know, they got that computer sitting beside you, and they're talking about transmission fluid flushes, and they're going on. He tried to sell me transmission fluid flush. He tried to sell me cooling system flush. He tried to sell me, I can't remember some of the other stuff. And of course, I wasn't going to get that done. I wanted the experience of the oil change, but it was a synthetic service. I could show you the receipt, $128. And I was there for probably, from the time I pulled up to the time I left, probably just under an hour. What I find funny about Quick Lubes is they say you don't need an appointment. What they really mean is you can't get an appointment if you try. It's first come, first serve, and if you need to sit here for a while, that's the way it's going to be. But first come, first serve. So why do people go to Quick Lubes? Because it's fast and it's less expensive? No. You can check it out. The last time I saw, in Canada at least, the average invoice, the average ticket, the average dollar amount per repair order or work order, whatever you want to call it, is $143. So considering $50 is about the average price, some say 29, some say 39, some say 49. I find it interesting when people try to get the cheapest oil change they can. So do you try to save money on oil or do you want to save your engine? There's good quality oil for a reason. And and I've tracked it, by the way. I know some people who own Quick Lubes, and I've been told that between 40 and 50% of the people that come to their places will only buy the oil change. No matter what you try to sell them, they will only buy the oil change. And some of you from the US might remember, I don't remember what company it was, but it was this guy in a commercial standing in front of the mirror. He said, no, don't need the air filter. Now I'll pass on the air filter. Now I'll get the air filter next time. And then you see him at the Quick Lube getting his oil change. Hey, sir, you need an air filter. Put it in. Is basically they're saying we're not going to try to sell you something, and of course they will. So if 40 or 50% of the people are going to spend $29, $39, or $49, whatever the price is, and the average invoice is just under 150, and half the people are only spending 50, that means there's a lot of them that are over $200 to make the average 150. So it's not just the oil change, it's all the others. And I don't know about in other parts in the country, but I was surprised that they actually do tire switchovers. They don't sell tires, but they do tire swaps and put the winters on, whatever. And some of the extra services they provide, I just kept trying to remember some of the other services. And I thought, my God, this is just this massive menu that they've got. So the bottom line is you want people, even if it's just for an oil change. So that's 20 years ago. Now I would say Rex is what I would call one of the kings of pre-booking appointments. At any given time, he has over 700 appointments as well. One change that he made, and I'll end this with this, is he decided instead of telling people your appointment is on Tuesday, and by the way, they tell the time. And one thing I don't think I mentioned here, when you're booking your schedule, you want more reserve time on Mondays and Fridays. Another luxury you have of pre-booking is avoiding, to the best of your ability, Mondays and Fridays. So when you're making an appointment for somebody, offer them Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Now, if they can only come in on a Monday, of course we're going to give them a Monday. It's 3 months from now. But the ability to focus your booking on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and don't even bring up Monday or Friday, because usually they take care of themselves. So you can start to get more of your business in the Tuesday, the Wednesday, and the Thursday. So that can work really well for you as well. So one change that he made, I don't know how long ago it was, but he found this work better. And I've been in a shop, I see how it works. At the end of the day, every time, not once in a while, not sometimes if they remember, 100% of the time, when the customer comes in, they've already printed off the invoice because they usually call them and say, how will you be paying? And of course, it doesn't work and the credit card gets declined, then they can redo it. But in most cases, that's already printed off before the customer gets there. And they say, okay, so you came in, you had this noise, and we diagnosed the noise, and this is what the noise was, and we've fixed that, and the noise is gone. We've test drove it and made sure it's gone, and it's exactly what we said, $230.52. And so here's your receipt. And by the way, right here is a card that shows you that your next appointment is going to be the week of March 1st to the 7th. And what we're going to do is we're going to call you the week before, and you can choose which day that week is going to work best for you. And that's what they do. So every single day, somebody at the shop phones the customers that are supposed to be coming in the next week. So they'll start on the Monday, and maybe they make 4 or 5 calls a day, so they're all done in the week. And say, by the way, we're calling from the shop, and we made the appointment for you for the tire rotation. We made the appointment for the timing belt. We made the appointment for the whatever. And we'd like to see, which day would you like next week? Would you like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? What day works for you? Okay, Tuesday's good. Okay, well, we'll make the appointment. How about 8:15 on Tuesday? Well, okay, that'll work. This system has been done by the shop for years, and they've been phenomenal at it. So whether it's you set a specific day and send an email 10 days out, or you can call them 2 days out, or you call them 5 days out, what's important here is the consistency. So I want to encourage you, starting today, depending on what time you're listening to this, or tomorrow, never say to somebody, we'll see you next time. They should know and leave knowing, like when you leave the dentist, you know when you're going back. They don't see you next time. They say, we're going to see you on December 12th. So I'm going to encourage you to never say see you next time. Take the opportunity every single time with every single customer to pre-book that appointment. I definitely recommend a card stapled right to the work order. The thing, or the invoice, what I like about that is the subtlety of it. In other words, instead of saying to the customer, your appointment is going to be, and you look at them and saying it, all you need to do is point to the card and say, by the way, up here is your card that shows that your next appointment is the week of. And it's non-threatening. It's not a specific day that they have to check their calendar. Will I be available on the Tuesday at 8:15 in the morning? They go, oh yeah, you're going to call me the week before. And I can tell you that almost nobody says no, and the bulk of the people keep those appointments. And so again, 3 examples of many shops that are doing a phenomenal job with that. I know I've gone way over my time. I'm sure I haven't been paying attention to that, but I love teaching the stuff because I've seen the impact that pre-booking appointments has. When you factor so when you focus on your labor inventory, the goal of selling all the hours that you bought, you want to sell all the tires you bought, you want to sell all the parts that you bought, you want to sell all the hours that you bought. Whether they're hourly or flat rate, that's not the point. If they're there for 8 hours, we want to sell that inventory. And if we didn't, what happened? What was the leakage? And what can we do to make sure that that doesn't continue to happen? So focus on the labor inventory, schedule it in advance, make sure that you don't overbook a day. Overbooking a day screws things up. Underbooking a day screws things up. The goal is to sell about 70% of your day before the day even starts. And it's really neat when you look a month out and you go, oh, we've got 6 appointments a day. We've got 7 appointments a day for whatever period of time for the next 3 or 4 months. Anyway, with that, thank you very much. Here's my phone call. I'm over. Anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate your attendance. Again, I'm going to be sending this recording to you, the link to it at least. It's actually a hidden thing on YouTube, but you get a private link and you'll be able to watch it. You can download it to your hard drive if you like. I'm going to send you instructions, a short little webinar on how to download from YouTube any video, including these webinars. And so you can download it to your hard drive. I'm not going to encourage you to sell it, to other shops in your area or advertise it in a newspaper or an automotive magazine. But no, you can use it for as long as you want. You have a new service advisor that starts in 2 weeks, in 2 years, whatever. I'm going to encourage you to have them to listen to this. You can print off as many of the sets of materials as you need for your own shop. And again, I'll send you the instructions on how to do that. And I will be sending you the PowerPoint that I showed you earlier, or sorry, the Excel spreadsheet, the Power of Team. I'll be sending you the 2 articles that I mentioned, and I'll send you the link to the workshop and another set of materials just so you have that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and attendance, and go back and kick butt.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.